Paul George gives his side of the story about his split with the Clippers. We'll talk about what teams still have work to do in the offseason, and Team USA is in training camp. We'll talk about the big picture narratives as they go for gold. All that and more on Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On NBA, your daily source for all things NBA from the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for joining us and making us part of your lives, being with us here Monday through Friday. Appreciate you guys being along for the ride, whether you're checking this out on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or at youtube.com/LockedOnNBA, where you can catch the show every single day for a video version. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sportsing like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. My name's Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network, co-host of Locked On Nuggets. I'm joined by David Ramil of Locked On Heat. Lots to get to on today's show. We're going to talk about what teams still have work to do in the offseason, what teams still need to maybe look at upgrades, what left is there to do, and is Zach LaVine ever going to get dealt? We'll talk about Team USA and the big picture narratives as they've convened for camp. Lots of smiles, lots of good times and good vibes with Team USA, but they're in a pretty tough group. We'll talk about what that looks like, as well as we start, David, with Paul George, who spoke on his podcast for the first time, gave the lowdown on his side of the story. It was his kind of turn to give his side of the story after so much was kind of reported about what happened. And there was like a number of interesting things here. He actually laid out like the entire kind of timeline for what happened with the Los Angeles Clippers. He went through everything from what his first offer was to their first offer to what kind of happened. The first offer that they said was $60 million over 2 years. That's 2 years, $30 million per year. A 2-year contract, only $60 million, quote unquote, only $60 million, which George called crazy. And he says, quote, as we kept going, they would go up inches to where it was like 40, 45. But this was like a couple months in between before we got to 40 something. And I'm still like, nah, I'm not doing that. Then he says, I heard wind of what they're saying, what they're going to give Kawhi. So I'm like, just give me what Kawhi got. Y'all view that as the same. We came here together. I'll take what Kawhi got. I was cool with that. Leonard accepted less than the max, but he was willing to do the same to keep the core together, but they just broke off talks. And then when they came back, they now brought up to 3 years, $150 million. And that's where George counters with $212 million and a no trade clause. Ultimately, the Clippers declined that offer, and we know the rest of the story with him joining the Philadelphia 76ers. So there's an interesting question here, David, which is, to me, this starts with, do you believe that Paul George was right to expect the same from the Clippers as what they gave Kawhi Leonard?
I can't answer that. I don't think it's based necessarily on their production on the court, because they play differently. They're asked to do different things. And because we can't really, I still think that even despite everything that's happened over the last few seasons, that we can't really gauge how they're supposed to complement each other on the court, because it seems still, even after all years of seeing them together, like an unfinished product. But I think he brings up a good point that if the if the front office did say, you know what, we do view you on par with Kawhi Leonard, like in terms of you're both integral core pieces of our rotation, you're our building blocks, you're everything on the same level, then I think it's fair to expect that kind of pay. I think if you say that we are not the same player, but if we are same in terms of equal levels of importance to this franchise, then why shouldn't I get compensated equally? Do you disagree?
I don't. So I would argue that you pay Kawhi Leonard for a handful of games where he is absolutely spectacular and looks like the best player in the world throughout the regular season. On any given night, Kawhi can look like the best player in the NBA. And you're going to get that, I don't know, 10, 12 times a year based off of rest and situation and opponent, where like it actually matters. And then you pay him the rest of it for the last 8 minutes of an elimination game. Like, that's why you have him, is the ability to take over and be that guy. You pay Paul George for the rest of it. And Clippers fans have kind of gone at me because they're like, look, Paul George has missed a lot of time too. Absolutely. The difference for me is that Paul George misses time with very acute injuries. He misses like, oh, he strained this thing. Oh, he suffered this injury. Oh, he had this like finger dislocation. Oh, he strained a hamstring. Like, very specific, like this stuff happens to professional athletes things. Kawhi Leonard misses time with knee soreness for long stretches where you have no idea when he's going to come back. Paul George, if he's available, he's going to play. Like, if he's not like actively hurt, the trainers are like, you're good to go. He's going to play. He's going to play. And he's going to fill in the dots. He's going to have stretches where he looks awesome, and then he's going to fade to the background when the defense adjusts, and then he'll step back up and have some huge plays. And like, that's what he does. He fills in all of those gaps. My argument is not that Paul George's best is as good as Kawhi's best,
right,
but that you need Paul George to reinforce Kawhi. And that James Harden is not that guy. James Harden's like an entirely other thing that supports that dynamic.
The system.
It worked to a large degree. In 2021, they had a real shot at winning the title. And then Kawhi suffered that knee injury, tore his ACL. That's an acute injury. Tore his ACL versus the Jazz. And that Sun series would have been an all-timer, and I would have liked the Clippers in that series had Kawhi been healthy. Missed their shot. But what's happened since is like a lot of, honestly, scapegoating of Paul George. And there are things that Clippers fans have pointed out to me, which are like, hey, his leadership wasn't great last year. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. What I would say is that Paul George's bad leadership on a bad day is better than Kawhi's great leadership on a good day. Kawhi shows up. He makes fun of whatever's going on around him, including assistants trying to get him to do things like run laps. He practices when he wants to. He provides no communication to the front office, the coaching staff, or anybody of when he's going to play or when he's not going to play. That's been documented.
Yeah.
And Kawhi's worth it because he's that awesome. But it is reasonable for Paul George to expect the same respect. They came together as a package deal. And the way that Paul George, in my opinion, has been scapegoated by the Clippers for their failures does not sit right with me. And I don't think it's going to work out well in the first year in the Intuit Dome.
Could you argue that Paul George is even of greater value, not a better player, but of greater value based on his availability? I mean, having played 74 games last year and everything that you just laid out, the guy who kind of fills the gaps and might not be perfect as a player, but certainly in some regards, even better than what Kawhi is.
So I looked at some of those numbers. Paul does miss a ton of time. He just does. He misses a ton of time. And if you throw out the full season where Kawhi missed, which that feels like a relevant thing. But if you just say like, look, he had 1 year where he tore his ACL. What do you want from the guy? Fair, right? You know, Paul broke his leg in training for the Olympics. Stuff happens. But if you take out that year, they've played within, I think it's like Paul's like played like 10 more games. So it's not this huge differential. It feels that way to me, that it feels like Paul has been way more there than Kawhi has been. But he really hasn't been. Last year, he was a little bit more, obviously. But in general, it's hard to make that argument. So this is like a complicated thing, and I don't blame the Clippers for moving on. I wrote about this on Action Network. My big thing here, David, is if you reach this point where you're just like, no, like we don't care if we lose you. We're not willing to go in the second apron. We're not doing this long term. We're not paying you. Okay, guess what? It's time for you to pivot. To me, there's no reason to keep Kawhi Leonard if you're going to keep Paul George. And what they decided was like, no, we got to keep Kawhi Leonard. He's the guy. And Paul George is just like a guy. And I just don't agree with that assessment based off of everything that we know about Kawhi.
But Harden is a system, and he is an innings eater in that sense. Like, he's going to play a lot of games. He's going to be available. So he's going to care. He's going to be asked to fill in a lot of what Paul George was providing last year. So I think it'll work. But I agree with that point. I'm curious, though, because you kind of mentioned it before we started recording. Like, a lot of fans are taking like what George said on his podcast and kind of being like, oh, you're being ridiculous. Like, how can you expect us to feel sorry for you when they're offering you $30 million a year? And that's the way Paul George comes across. Like, I think it's also unfair. These are NBA players. The kind of, our worlds are very, very small in comparison to them. So is it unfair to kind of criticize George for not taking less money because he's still being offered a lot of money? Like,
yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, that to me is the thing is like, well, you're not worth this much. Philadelphia thought he was worth that much.
Yeah.
The odds market responded by boosting the Sixers way up on the title board, way higher than the Clippers. If you got Kawhi Leonard and he's so good and you don't need Paul George, why are the Clippers odds so bad? Now, sportsbook odds are not everything, but to me, it's like indicative where, I've kind of looked at it. I'm just like, no, like the Clippers are just, there's a very good chance. I thought the Clippers had a great offseason in terms of what they did after losing Paul George.
Sure.
I just don't agree with the way that they approached a guy who had really bought into them and had tried to be a lot for them. And I feel like they rewarded the guy that demands being rewarded that way, as opposed to the guy that does all the hard stuff. And that to me is where the challenge gets in. On the other side, the NBA offseason is mostly over after the Kings trade for DeMar DeRozan, but some teams feel like they still have some work to do. We'll talk about that, as well as wrapping up a little bit of the trade conversations that bubble as we head into Summer League here on Locked On NBA. Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Comparison is the thief of joy, and it's easy to envy other people's lives. It might look like they have it all together on their Instagram, but in reality, they probably don't. Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. This is such great advice in terms of career stuff in particular. I think it's very easy to look around and be like, why does this person have this thing I want, whether it's money or status or promotion or role? I think it's easy to kind of look at those things. But in reality, the best thing is for you to focus on the things that you can control in life. And that's where therapy is great, is being able to guide you back to being able to focus on what you need to focus on. It's not just about feelings and trauma. Those things are very important. It's about base stuff of taking care of yourself and finding the best way to make yourself the best that you can. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. We'll be right back on Locked On NBA. Back here on Locked On NBA. Thanks for joining us. Matt Moore alongside David Ramil. So, David, the offseason's mostly over. The Kings traded for DeMar DeRozan. They finally traded Harrison Barnes. It seems like most of the rosters are set. Even Haywood Highsmith is off the board. Caleb Martin finally got a deal. When the Heat are done, most everyone's done. And it feels like there's a lot of stuff that's just kind of been settled. But I still think there's a couple of teams that still have some work to do before the season begins. And in particular, I think there's still some hanging questions, especially with the Chicago Bulls. Let's start there. So Zach LaVine still on Chicago. Never would have thought that DeMar would move on before LaVine. If there's anyone that I think that is proof of where the CBA is at and how toxic large contracts for players that don't seem to be worthy of the max contract slot is, it's probably Zach LaVine. Vooch is still there. I want to ask you this, and I understand for you it's like a speculative question. It is for me as well. Like I don't have any sort of like intel to provide on this. We're both just kind of talking here about feel. Do you feel like we're going to see Zach LaVine on the Bulls on opening night? Are they just stuck together, or do you think they'll be able to find a deal by the time camp starts?
No, I think it's a fair point. I think they'll be stuck. I think he'll still be on that roster because I just don't see. We're seeing teams shy away from paying a couple of million because they're trying to avoid the punitive measures that come with the CBA. And that being the case, like taking on his contract, as egregious as it is, again, relative to NBA terms, like it's fine, but you're not just looking to take on his contract. It's the tax that's going to come with it, and it's going to be a hefty one. And I don't know that his production could ever, or certainly not under this new CBA, live up to that ungodly amount. And that being the case, I think they're going to be stuck having to pay it because I don't think any team is going to be willing to accept that roster. Accept that contract. It's just too unwieldy. And it's not even a knock on him as a player, although I think there was a piece that came out today kind of not illustrating some of the narratives that have been attached to LaVine over the course of the last couple of seasons that he's been on the trade block. I think it's a valid point to kind of say, you know what, maybe we're thinking about him in a way that we shouldn't, but it's just, regardless of how you even view him as a player, I just don't think that a lot of teams are willing to pay anyone that much money. Certainly not a player like LaVine, though.
To me, it's wild that Brandon Ingram is considered the way that he is versus Zach LaVine is considered the way that he is. The gap between those two players is just not that wide.
Sure.
It's not. And I think LaVine can still be a positive contributor. Now, I think that there are things that have happened that have poisoned the well in Chicago. I'll also kind of say this. So there's a lot of rumors about OG Anunoby like wanting a bigger role. And then I mentioned this on the show before. And then he leaves Clutch and he tells like local media, like, no, I never said that. That was never what I wanted. And he goes to the Knicks and he like fits in perfectly as a role player. There's a lot of conversations about Trae Young maybe wanting to go to San Antonio. And then Trae Young leaves Clutch. And now those rumors are pretty much over. I just continue to kind of wonder if there's been a disservice done by his representation, who is, look, they're aggressive and they've gotten a lot of guys paid, but I also just wonder if there's been maybe an overplaying of hands, which tends to happen when you're that aggressive. You're going to have some times when you either bluff or push too hard and you get caught. And so I think that for LaVine, there is a little bit of image rehab that needs to happen. And, you know, that could very easily happen. Like if he comes back to this Bulls team and just plays well. And I wrote about DeMar DeRozan's addition with the Sacramento Kings. One of the things that I do believe is that DeMar DeRozan is a wonderful human being who everyone thinks the best of, and who is one of the most efficient mid-range scorers that we've ever seen in the game. He's a pro's pro. There is also a consistent habit of the other best players on DeMar's teams not being as good when they share the court with Zach. Like there's just a history, or with DeMar, there's just a history of it. And so like, I don't think it's absolutely crazy to think that DeMar moves on and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, Zach LaVine looks like his 2021 self again. That's wild.
But even still, I think people would dislike him for it though, because now it seems like Chicago is actively trying to tank.
Yes.
And if all of a sudden he salvages the team, he's going to get pilloried for that. Like it's going to be terrible. It's lose for him.
It's a no win. Yeah. So I think he's going to have to figure out a way to kind of get around that. And I do think there's probably somewhere for him to go. I think some teams should look at this thing. I think the CBA is making it hard, but I think some teams need to just buckle up and be like, it's fine. Like we can't do better than Vucevic starting for us at center, or at least being a backup. We can't do better than Zach LaVine.
Is it Miami? I mean, they're fans desperate to try and move Tyler Hero, right? I mean, he's obviously a cheaper, younger player who produces at almost the same level as LaVine. But do you think that Miami could take a player like LaVine and somehow transform that image, the way he's viewed, if he buys into quote unquote Heat culture?
I think that the Heat, to their credit, not everything I will say on here is shots at the Heat. The Heat, to their credit, I think they have high standards. And honestly, I respect the fact that they haven't done anything this offseason. It's very frustrating for fans, and that's evident. You can kind of listen to Locked On Heat to get a sense of that. But like, they're also not going to be like, we're not going to do something just to do it. We're not going to make a move just to make it. Like, we want to win championships, which means we'll wait. And we'll keep waiting and we'll be patient and we'll get the guy eventually. And then we'll be back off to the races. Now, if you deal with a more desperate franchise that's, you know, trying to cling on to respectability and reclaim a once lost kind of perception of prestige. In unrelated news, the Los Angeles Lakers make a lot of sense. So, you know, look, if you tell the Bulls, the Bulls are in a position where you can be like, hey, we'll give you D'Angelo Russell and Rui Hachimura. And the Bulls will be like, all right, sure. Let's make it happen. You know, so that to me I feel like we're going to go a complete 360 where this started with Zach LaVine to the Lakers, and it's going to be the Thanos meme of you just come all the way back around, and it's, where did it lead you? Back to me. Like, I feel like that's where we're going to get to. One other team I want to talk about before we get a break, and that's New Orleans Pelicans. They don't have a center right now. They drafted a very young prospect, a very tantalizing prospect, but their options right now in the front court, I think, are pretty limited. And I don't love the idea of starting Zion at 5. I think you want to have that. You want to at least have the ability to play around it. Now, a very reasonable kind of offer might be CJ McCollum in a deal for Wendell Carter Jr. That makes a lot of sense. The Magic have very clearly been made it clear how they feel about Wendell Carter Jr. this summer, because they extended Goga, they re-signed Goga, and they extended Isaac. And they're just very awkward looking at and then there's WCJ just kind of sitting here. So I think that Wendell Carter could be a really good fit there.
Mo Wagner too. You know, they brought Mo back too. It's like how far down the depth chart is he at this point in time? You know, it's just interesting that
you know what's funny? The advanced metrics. A lot of the advanced metrics think that Mo Wagner was the most impactful guy on the Magic last year. Yeah. I know. You don't have to agree with that assessment to be like, well, if he's most impactful by the metrics, he's probably pretty impactful in reality. And I just feel like a lot of these teams could take let me put it this way. As a Grizzlies guy, I would much rather be starting Mo Wagner than Zach Edey. I would feel way better about it. I do not love this rookie center on a contending team bit. But I think the Pelicans need to try and make a move. So I'll be curious to kind of see what they do. There's been some talks of like some rumors, at least, of three-way talks with the Cavs for Jared Allen. I still don't think the Cavs are going to pull the trigger, but that would be a good fit. I guess here's a question. Do you think the Pelicans need a center?
Yeah, at some point you just need somebody to. I mean, you're playing in the West. You're going to go up against Nikola at some point, and that's being the case. Like you're it'd be nice to have somebody who can defend them. Like I'm not even talking about the playoffs because who knows by that point what you can do at the trade deadline. But just during the course of the regular season, you need a big body out there. They don't have one on the roster. You can't throw Misi, as good as he might be, out there and say, you know what, figure it out. You're a rookie, and let's play you some minutes and see how you adapt. That's not going to work. That could be the death knell on what could potentially be a good career. So you know what, I don't like that. I think you're going to have to find somebody that could play at a reasonably high level. I think it raises the team ceiling if they can find somebody. I think I like Carter Jr. I'm glad you brought it up because I think he's a great player. Like, I mean, look, I know he's missed time, but when his spacing out there would complement Zion in such a nice way, he's a solid rebounder overall. He's another big body that you can throw out there. I think it would be a great fit in New Orleans. So if they could pull that off, I think it would certainly. I could see it improving both teams, especially if they wind up sending CJ back to Orlando.
Up next, Team USA is in training camp, and they're having a pretty good time. We'll talk about the vibes. We'll talk about the narratives. Who's the best player on Team USA? We'll talk about that and more up next here on Locked On NBA. I love sports. I love them all summer long, and that includes betting on WNBA in the summer. I've bet on Angel Reese to win Rookie of the Year. I think it's going to be close between her and Clark. She's a double-double machine. Somebody called her Denise Rodman the other night. I thought that was very funny. I also am buying the links. You're gonna get a dip in their price because Nafisa Collier is out right now, and I think that there's a good chance that when she gets back, the links are gonna be right back. Like I have them power rated as the best team in the WNBA right now. Aces are getting back to being the aces, but I do think that there's a very good. I think the links are underrated in the odds. They're underpriced in the market right now. You can bet that. You can bet baseball. There's so much to bet on in the summer. You can get on NBA futures. We're going to have win totals next week, so it's going to be very exciting. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. We'll be right back on Locked On NBA. Final segment here on Locked On NBA. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you guys being with us here on a Tuesday. Make sure to check in all throughout the week. You got Jake Madison, John Corrales on Tuesday. Make sure to buy John's book as well as it's a great book on the Boston Celtics NBA championship, Banner 18. Then later in the week, you got Pat, the designer, and Nick Angstadt, and capping us off on Friday, Adam Mares and Wes Goldberg, our counterparts on Locked On Heat and Locked On Nuggets, respectively. So Team USA is in training camp, David, and I saw that there's been lots of good content coming out of camp. There was a video of them all like meeting each other and like giving hugs and how happy they are to see each other. As an old school guy, that made me vomit a little bit just from the perspective of I miss when guys didn't like each other so much, but lots of smiles, lots of good stuff there. There was a great video asking them if they could spin the basketball on their finger. And the fact that Steph Curry can't is like the most mind-boggling, absolute break my brain thing in the world. And the fact that Anthony Davis is like the best at it is absolutely insane. The Olympic groups are out as well. So USA lands in Group C along with Serbia, South Sudan, and Puerto Rico. By the way, inspiring win by Puerto Rico. This win that was really awesome to see was Jose Alvarado. Group B, you got France, Germany, the 2023 FIBA World Cup champs, Japan, and Brazil. Group A is the group of death. That's Australia, Canada, Greece, and Spain. So what? Quadrennial, instead of perennial, quadrennial powerhouse Spain, who's always really good. Greece with Giannis, Canada with Shea, Jamal Murray, and a bunch of NBA guys, and Australia, who's always tough as nails with a bunch of NBA guys, all in the same group. But I want to talk about Team USA here. First, I think this is a really interesting question. Who's the best player on Team USA right now?
It's Joel Embiid. I thought that was pretty clear, right? I mean, isn't he the MVP? He might be hurt, but for everything that we kind of like to look at what Kevin Durant has been over the course of his career, what LeBron is, what Steph Curry still is, we're talking about what was the most dominant player in the league last year. And if that's the case, why is there any other argument for any other player, despite whatever they've accomplished over the course of their career?
He would have won MVP last year, so he would have been a 2-time reigning MVP. I think one of the interesting questions here is how much does how these guys play in the NBA translate to international basketball?
Fair enough.
Because it is different, right? Embiid, the argument, and look, I don't have any problem with anybody saying Embiid. He would have won MVP and been very deserving last year. But Embiid's game is very much NBA driven, where there's a large chunk of it that's fouls, and you just typically don't get that kind of whistle in FIBA play. It's one of the adjustments that international players have, is they're like, really? That's a foul? There was also a really great clip, by the way, from the scrimmage yesterday with the bench absolutely going nuts after Joel Embiid drew a late whistle. And somebody yelling, what is this? June, what is this, January? There's the candidates otherwise are really interesting, because I asked this question on Twitter, and so a lot of people said LeBron, and a lot of people said Steph. And one of the things that the alpha of the team was asked, Anthony Edwards had 2 answers. One later, he was like, they got adjusted my game, which I think he was honestly just messing with the media. He initially said KD. And I think that there is kind of this respect of KD. I got a lot of answers for KD too, that he's still quote unquote the best player on the team, which is interesting given that he's, in his mid-30s. I will say that this team is a little bit worrisome in terms of the future of the sport. And the reason I say that is, if it's who's the best players on the team? Joel Embiid, who's 30, or Steph Curry, who's in his mid-30s, LeBron, who's 40, and is still able to be in this conversation, which is incredible. Or Kawhi Leonard, mid-30s, KD, mid-30s. And it's you don't really. And now some of that's the international guys, right? Like Luka Doncic, who will not be in the Olympics, is one of the best players in the world. Nikola Jokic is one of the best players in the world. They'll play him in the Serbia game. But I think it's an interesting question kind of how to parse out the fact that so many of the best players on this team are old guys. The 2008 Redeem team was Kobe was the old guy, and then it was mostly guys in their prime. And this is mostly old guys with a few guys like Tatum and Booker and Ant as that kind of next generation, but they're down the line a little bit.
Yeah, I think part of that is just LeBron James wanting to go one last time in the Olympics before he calls it quits, I suppose. I don't know that we'd be having this conversation about that if they had just changed the way that they'd built this team without LeBron as being, one of the older players in the league. Is he the oldest player in the league at this point?
Has to be.
Yeah, I guess he does. That's a weird statement, right? But I think it would have been a little different had he not participated. Then they probably would have gone a little younger, and we wouldn't necessarily be having this conversation. But I think the future of the team is just fine.
Yeah, I think that they should be good. I will say this is really interesting when I think with Serbia in that group. Now both of them should advance. They to advance should be Serbia and the United States. It shouldn't be if one of those teams does not make it, then a disaster has occurred out of Group C. Group A, I think, is going to be really tough. Greece is good. Spain's always better than you think, even after they've slid since the days of their peak. With the Gasols, Canada still, it just has so much talent and there's so much momentum behind them. And Australia is tough as nails. So that group is absolutely ridiculous.
Is there a clear betting favorite at this point?
Besides Team USA, or you mean for the group?
Yeah, no, besides Team USA.
I haven't looked at the board. I'm going to imagine that's an interesting one. Who do you think should be the second favorite there in that group?
I don't think. I don't know if it can be Spain. I honestly don't know. Could it be Spain? They I don't know if they have the talent that they've had in years past, but they've got the experience and everything else like that. I don't know. I haven't followed FIBA basketball as much as I probably should have to answer this question, but I'm sure that there are worthy options there. Germany? I don't.
The answer is Canada. Canada is your second favorite in the odds. France is third at 14-1 with tied with Serbia. So yeah, interesting stuff there. Final one kind of for you here is what is like the most interesting thing for you about this Team USA? Like what's the big storyline that you find compelling?
Honestly, I want to see how this group works together and how they overcome adversity, as maybe simplistic as that is. Like I just don't think they're not going to be as dominant as they've been in years past. I don't think they're going to catch anybody by surprise. Other teams are increasingly better, and as good as USA might look on paper, and as much as they might seem like a complementary group, I guess there are concerns about injury. Already KD's hurt. You know, there are concerns about age. How do they face adversity, which they'll certainly face at some point in the tournament? And that being the case, who steps up, I think, is also my biggest question too. Is it KD? Because it seems like he would be him. Like who's Carmelo? Who's FIBA Carmelo Anthony, who just knocks down those crazy shots? I don't know that person is on this roster. As much as I like Anthony Edwards being the guy who kind of picks up the torch moving forward, I don't know if he's quite ready yet, or if they're going to defer to him as much as they have in the past. Is Steph going to be Steph the way he is at the NBA level in the FIBA competition? Like, I don't know. There's a lot there that's going to be potentially really interesting there. But just seeing how this team kind of bonds together, and to me, I still get goofy about that. I think, like, you know, for me, one of the things that I love the most about following Olympic basketball was seeing the '92 Dream Team and seeing that come together, and seeing these guys that I only knew of peripherally, of like, oh, you know, he plays for this team, he plays for that, but you're getting them all together. Like, seeing all that still gives me like a goofy sense of appreciation and joy, you know, for everything that the country represents and all the issues going on around the world and everything else. I kind of overlooked that, just however briefly, and maybe that's right or wrong, I don't even know. But just to see all these players come together and kind of become like this great powerhouse is still fun for me to watch.
I think for me, I always love seeing who's the guy that pops. You kind of mentioned Melo. There's always a guy that you don't really expect that plays a bigger role sometimes. I would like it to be Tyrese Halliburton. That would be very cool to me, just from oh wow, like this style of play is very good, and Hallie's just like this assist machine that just sets everybody up. I think that'd be a very cool kind of mechanism. It'll probably wind up being either Embiid or Booker or Tatum is like the guy that we're like, oh yeah, that's right, those guys are really good. It's gonna be very interesting to see like those guys, Ant, Booker, Tatum, are kind of competing for that Melo spot of the guy that gets buckets in the Olympics. And that I think is going to be like an interesting thing to kind of watch. Should be an entertaining summer of basketball. By the way, do you know who is on the 3-on-3 team?
I do not.
I will give you one name. Jimmer Fredette.
Yeah.
Jimmer Fredette is on the 3-on-3 team. All right. That's going to do it for Locked On NBA. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you guys being with us. You can check out David on Locked On Heat all throughout the week. You can catch me on Locked On Nuggets. Appreciate you guys being with us. Have yourselves a great week. Keep it right here for all things NBA throughout the week. We'll see you guys again next time on Locked On NBA.